Okay, so I'm going to be discussing a subject here that I have read before. Um, the reason being is that sometimes there's other angles I could take with certain videos, and it is a very important subject. It's also very topical right now with the G20 summit in Hangzhou that has just passed. I think this is as topical as ever. Also, because I've got so many videos, people may come across this, they may not come across the other ones, and so on. So I want to talk a bit about Chinese nationalism now. I'm going to be very candid in this video and very blunt because this is a subject I feel quite strongly about. I'm not going to make it too comprehensive, but there is a number of things that do need to be discussed, raised. Firstly, I have reasonable knowledge of Chinese history, and I'm well aware of the excuses that are usually made whenever Westerners talk about China. Usually it goes along the lines of, oh, do you know how long our history is? As if this automatically makes an argument correct, as if having a long history automatically positions your point of view as being correct. If you are a young Chinese citizen, as most of these cyber nationalists are, that the fact that your country has a long history is totally irrelevant to whatever argument you're trying to make. Egypt has a long history, Iran has a long history, indeed Britain has a long history. We may have only recorded our history since the Romans, but we have sophisticated societies going back further than that. The point is, this thing about long history is a very phony argument, and it's something they churn up all the time. I want to talk specifically about what I believe to be the incredible arrogance of a lot of online Chinese nationalists. And it's something I've experienced many times. I've personally been targeted by them actually because I've quoted that case where I stood up for the Canadian journalist. They insinuated I was her boyfriend or something. That was a lot of rubbish. I've never met her in my life. But what I was doing was standing up for the principle of a free press. They just didn't like the fact that she was asking Foreign Minister Wang Yi a question about human rights. Now, one very ugly side product of Chinese nationalism, and this has been very prominent over the past sort of 10, 15 years, is this it's a toxic combination of supersensitivity and very aggressive hyper-nationalism. When you get those two things together, it's a lethal combination, because when you get someone who's sensitive, they interpret everything as an attack or something to be offended by, then they're going to get into a mob mentality, and I've seen this many times. The bottom line is these Chinese nationalists are incredibly thin-skinned. They cannot handle criticism of their country. And yet this is the thing, they make out that Western media picks on China, but not only does the Western media focus on issues that are going on in the West, probably a lot more than it focuses on China. If you don't believe me, CNN recently had a report on the plight of Indigenous Canadians. Okay, so this idea that it just picks on China is baseless. But it just lends into the victimhood narrative. I am so sick and tired of their aggressive, obnoxious behaviour, because basically they think that if they hear something they don't want to hear, the correct approach to that, instead of engaging in adult debate, it's to get into pathetic slurs and insults. That's what they do. If you look at some of the language that they use, again, this is complete hypocrisy, because they will often use the picture of, oh, you Westerners are using bad language about China, and they have this thing about etiquette. And yet, if you look at the sort of language that they use, when they speak in English, it's anything but polite. You know, it's not a case of, well, we respectfully disagree. It's a case of, fuck you, biased BBC, or you dog Westerners, or, you know, this is some really hateful stuff. Another thing that really bugs me is the fact that they're using YouTube and Facebook to do this. If these sort of views were on Chinese websites, then okay, that's Chinese websites. They're controlled by the government, and although there is scope within the Chinese cyberspace of debate, but it is within that spectrum, it's sort of understandable because it is within the Chinese internet spectrum. But what really galls me is when they use Facebook and YouTube to promote their nationalistic bullshit. I just think it's incredibly arrogant. And it's hypocritical because the Communist Party blocks these websites. So this is ironic. They're using blocked websites to defend and make excuses for the very government that blocks them. The irony of that is you couldn't make it up. It's unbelievable. So that indicates one of two things. Either they are using a VPN, which is software in order to access these websites, and I know about that because I've personally used it. It's the only way you can access Facebook or YouTube in China. Or they are living in a country that doesn't block Facebook or YouTube, and there is a reasonable chance that will be a Western country. So they're basically enjoying the freedom of expression that comes from whatever Western country they're studying or working in to attack the West and to slander us and play the victimhood game. The fact of the matter is, Chinese people in the West have far more freedom to dissent than Westerners would have in China. Okay? If I was to say something as a Westerner in China that was really explicitly anti-communist, I would probably be arrested as a British spy. But we have to put up with their bullshit. We have to put up with their spreading nationalism wherever they go. Chinese tourists already have a very bad reputation because of their behaviour abroad. And in my opinion, this sort of aggressive nationalism really, really doesn't enhance that image. And if you think it's just about East versus West, it's not, because many other Asian countries have noticed this behaviour as well, whether it be Vietnam or the Philippines or other countries. So, you know, China's a powerful country, but there is a very deeply entrenched arrogance with this. And it comes down to a basic supremacist mindset that we are the Middle Kingdom, we are right. And they always play the victim, like, oh, look at how the West exploited us during the Opium Wars and so on. And they use that as if it is relevant today. And yet the greatest atrocities against the Chinese people have all occurred under communist rule. You know, we've just marked the 40th anniversary of the death of Chairman Mao, a man who was responsible for tens of millions of Chinese deaths. So the hypocrisy of these people is just infuriating, quite frankly. And what bothers me is they resent, this is a thing, right? They resent being tied to the Communist Party. So when people like me say you're a stooge of the CCP, they get all defensive and say, oh, no, we can criticise the CCP. If that is true, why do you have such a problem with outsiders doing it? Why the need to get so sensitive? Put it this way, Western governments get criticised all the time, but you simply don't see British people line up to defend the British government in the way that you people do with the Chinese government. Or Americans defend the American government, or Canadians defend the Canadian government. It just doesn't work like that. When it comes to exporting overseas nationalism, China gets a gold medal. And the rest of the world sees it. I personally take the view that we need to take China seriously. It's a powerful country. It's an important trading partner. And I certainly believe that we should have good relations with China. But they have to be mutually respectful relations. Now, honesty is part of respect. So if they don't like the fact that our leaders are expected to be honest in bringing up the issues like human rights, then that's just tough. But the point is this. Say what you want about the West. Okay, you could say the West is not perfect with human rights or whatever. And that's true, we're not. There's a very, very important difference. And this is a fact. And it's a fact that they cannot argue against. When it comes to transparency, the West is a lot more open. Western politicians get criticised all the time by Western media, and they are scrutinised all the time. You simply cannot say the same level with Chinese leaders in China. And right now, Xi Jinping is consolidating an enormous amount of power around himself. You know, I will give credit where credit is due. He has worked hard on the anti-graft, anti-corruption drive. That's a good thing, because corruption destroys society. So I'll give him credit for that. But I also think part of it is about consolidating absolute power around himself. And if China's not careful, I wouldn't go so far as to say that she is Chairman Mao. The Time magazine recently tried to make that analogy, that he's a modern day Mao. I wouldn't go that far, but certainly she has done next to nothing to improve transparency in China. He has cracked down on freedom of expression. And what his administration has done is really, really promote nationalism in a way that even Hu Jintao didn't do. And it was certainly apparent in the Hu Jintao years. But yeah, that's just my views. My simple message to Chinese people online is this: it's not so much that I take issue with you defending your country, it is the way in which you're doing it. And it is this idea that you seem to have that China is the only country in the world that should be above scrutiny. Because there's no equivalency here. America, Britain, Canada, France, Western countries are criticised all the time, but you do not get the level of sensitivity. So actually, although China is a powerful country in some regards, when it comes to being thick-skinned, it's incredibly weak. China is super sensitive, and that makes it weak. Okay? Strong countries do not get so easily offended the way China does all the time. And I think it's rather pathetic. Your ancient culture doesn't change that little fact. And by the way, since you keep bringing up this issue about an ancient history, it was the Communist Party that destroyed a lot of that history during the Cultural Revolution when they vandalized ancient temples and so on. So don't point fingers at Westerners for that one. I'll leave it there, really. When I make videos like this, I am acutely aware that I kind of put myself between a rock and a hard place. It's not easy for me, because I have a lot of Chinese friends, and there are many, many things I like a lot about China, and I'm fully aware that when I make a video like this, I do risk polarizing myself. I do risk causing a misunderstanding with my friends or a rift with my friends. If any of my friends happen to come across this, I would simply say, you know me. You know me. Forget nationalism here. Just try and think outside the box. You know me as a person. Okay, I might be British, but I'm talking as an individual. I'm talking about my views on this. It's not an anti-China position to criticize Chinese nationalism. It's simply an observation, and I'm speaking candidly. I'm sick and tired of the arrogant nature of it, because whenever you have a video or a news report where, whether it be Western journalists or Western leaders saying something about China, I guarantee you will have a large number of Chinese nationals coming onto the video solely to spread communist propaganda and Chinese nationalism. And it gets so pathetic and predictable. So predictable. You're not proving anything by trying to gang up on foreigners and say, "You shut up, you can't have an opinion." You're not proving a damn thing. Okay? If you really, really are interested in having an adult debate, then use a starting point. Show that you're a reasonable person and say, "I agree, my country is not above criticism." Because I'll tell you something, I don't take the attitude that my country is above criticism. I don't say Britain cannot be criticised, and that is the fundamental difference between my position and yours. So my final message to those people would be, grow up, stop being so sensitive, because really it's pathetic. And like I say, I want my country to have good relations, but I do believe that we need to be wary of any Chinese nationals who think that they could bring their nationalism onto these shores or into a Western country. I think sometimes we're too tolerant of that. If we are not permitted to criticize the communist government when we are visiting China, then we shouldn't tolerate them insulting us when they're here, whether it be overseas students or, and it happens too much. I'm not saying they should necessarily be stopped from doing it, but personally, I think the government should send out a message that this is the UK and we expect you to respect us. That means part of respect is not bringing your nationalism over here, because you would not like it if a group of Canadians or Britons or whatever went to China and flew the flag around and says, "Oh, you cannot criticise us." So seriously, grow up and stop being so pathetically sensitive. that doesn't show strength, it shows weakness.